Wheel City. Self-care Sunday. Yo. I'm like self-care on Sundays with a day off on Monday. Private jet on the runway, taking off, going one way to the top. Whoa. Who said the sky is the limit when I'm high is my vision? On Facebook Live, going live in a minute. Don't mind me, I'm just minding my business. Breaking news, doing interviews, but it's not about me, I'm doing this for you. Matter of fact, no, I'm doing this for proof that the self-care Sundays and dreams come true. They really do.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Self-Care Sundays podcast. We are excited for this week's guest, Jehmu Greene, who is a Democratic strategist, Fox News contributor, board chair of VoteRunLead, and former candidate for DNC Chair. But before we get started, I wanted to ask for your help supporting the podcast via Patreon and RadioPublic. Patreon allows supporters of the show to donate a monthly amount to help with our costs, including monthly maintenance fees and to pay our audio engineer. We'd also like to raise enough money to hire a transcription service to make our episodes more accessible to everyone. If you'd like to help us out, please check out patreon.com/selfcaresundayspodcast. That's patreon.com/selfcaresundayspodcast. We also wanted to let you know that our episodes are now on RadioPublic as well, which you can download on your iPhone or an Android and listen to millions of shows for free, including Self-Care Sundays with no account necessary. You can also go to radiopublic.com and search for Self-Care Sundays. Thank you for supporting our show. It's the generosity of our listeners that helps this information be accessible to so many people in the first place. Let's get started. How are you today, Jehmu?
I'm fantastic because I'm in Miami and I'm going to spend some time at the beach once we finish this conversation and spend some time in the sun, which is always great.
Yeah, so it sounds like you have your self-care for today worked out. Could you talk us through a typical day and kind of how self-care plays a role throughout your day?
Well, it's interesting, actually, that I mentioned spending time in the sun. For me, spending time in the sun on a typical day is really important. And this is a new development in my life where whatever is going on, whatever travel is happening, whatever crisis has presented itself, at the national political level or in my personal life, that I am committed to stopping whatever I'm doing and letting the sun touch not just my face. I think a lot of people get a little bit of sun exposure on your face, but I'm very intentional in that I have to spend at least 20 minutes getting sun on my arms and on my legs. And, also I'm very intentional that getting sun without wearing sunglasses. I don't know if a doctor would say that's the right thing to do, but it makes a world of difference in my ability to then get things done.
Yeah. Are there other habits you've kind of picked up along the way or that you've been doing recently kind of as part of your routine for just to make sure that you're feeling good and recharged?
Certainly. I mentioned that I'm in Miami. I'm here for a VoteRunLead training, the work that we're doing with WeWork to bring trainings to their spaces around the country. And that means that I've been traveling a lot. And throughout my career, I've had these moments where I travel a lot, where I'm only home for a few days. And a lot of those times in the past, I would go to a city, I would do whatever conference or speech or project I was working on, and then spend all of the rest of the time in the hotel and then get on a plane and go home. And having just wrapped up the WeWork VoteRunLead training here in Miami, I've now got another 48 hours in this great city with these great beaches. And I'm going to allow this professional trip to give me time to be in the sun, time to be in the water, and just not visiting a city and not taking advantage of the community, not taking advantage of whether it's an ocean, a lake, culture. I've added that to my travel routine, and it also makes me so much more productive when I'm in those cities.
Does it also feel like for you then you're not rushing in and out? It gives you just a little bit more time to breathe so your trips aren't I know I've flown into LA and flown back that night and it's just psychotic. It's 12 hours you're in one place. Do you feel like it gives you a little bit more time to breathe when you kind of lengthen the trips a little bit?
Absolutely. Whether it is extending the trip to be able to get some quality time, or if it's just, even if you can't extend the trip, one thing I will do is I'll find time to go to either my favorite restaurant or a restaurant that's been recommended by a friend to just have the best meal that I can have in that hour. And that break, that slowing down certainly helps in this just hyper partisan, issue from one minute to the next. You don't know what you're going to be hit with as a progressive. And the pause from that restaurant meal, the pause from the extension of the trip in the cities that I'm visiting means the world.
So how did you end up kind of discovering that these were things that were useful for you for your self-care? Were they things that you've always done or things that you used to do and have restarted? How did you kind of find your way to these habits?
Well, certainly one way I found out is that I think I almost killed myself. I had no self-care plan, and the result of that were dire health consequences. But how I found my way to where I am right now from a self-care standpoint is that I remembered who I was as a child who was curious and active and without a job and without social media. And that child was someone who spent the majority of my time outside in the sun, in the water, in the lakes of Austin. And so certainly this was always a part of who I was. I forgot that part. And in finding my way back here was to remember who I really was.
It kind of, you mentioned that you had grown up in Austin. I believe you recently moved back to Austin, which in our conversations offline feels like that was largely like an act of self-care, moving back to that place.
It was the biggest act of self-care I have done in my 46 years on this planet. And it was not a decision that was made lightly. And it was not a decision that I think a lot of people would think was the best move for me professionally, being in the media and moving away from the center of media in New York. Some people may say it's not strategic, but moving home to Austin was about quality of life first. And getting back to nature, getting back to connecting with a community that maybe is not hyper focused on politics every second of the day. My community in Austin, certainly they care about issues. They're engaged as activists in different ways, but they're more also connected to their families and to the culture in Austin around live music and the boating culture and really understanding that the best way for me to heal and to recapture that spirit of where I was as a child was to go to that place, my hometown, where that's where it all began for me. And so moving to Austin, immediately, my spirit changed. And the way I knew that was going to happen is that every time I visited home, I'd talk to people back in New York or DC or just in the professional context, and they'd be like, "You sound really happy." And well, you get so many friends saying, "You sound really happy." And they say it when you're home. When I would be in Austin, it was like, okay, I need to really listen to what they're saying, what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Often like those outside observations can kind of help highlight and help you in like your own learning process of what's working for you or not. It's just by kind of seeing yourself through other people's lenses.
Absolutely.
So you talked about it a little bit in terms of how you grew up, but I was wondering if you could share with us how you think your identity informs your self-care habits. I know people in the past have spoken about how, gender or race makes it challenging or kind of veers them away from self-care because it's not a thing that they see often or is not encouraged in communities or of women. And then they kind of have to find their way back.
Certainly as a Black woman growing up in Austin, I feel like I was really blessed to be out of the kind of comfort zone. My parents are Liberian immigrants. There's a Liberian community, and I have cousins in Austin who strictly stuck to that Liberian community. I have cousins in Austin who grew up several blocks away from me, and they never spent time at the lake. Never made it there. But my experience growing up in Austin was through a diverse community of friends, and certainly the diversity of the community of students, of graduate students from UT, which my dad was a PhD student at UT, which is why we moved to Texas. It brought us in contact with a more diverse community that embraced kind of the boating culture, embraced the hiking culture, embraced, like I said, just being in nature. And so I've got this very different experience than many people in my family, that we were right down the street. And I think a big part of that was that I stepped outside of my immediate community, my family community, my, racial community. I stepped outside and was at a very early age comfortable with being outside of my comfort zone. So self-care for me as a kid, or kind of how I embraced the community in Austin, a lot of times I was the only person who looked like me. Mm-hmm. And that certainly comes with a level of, barrier breaking discomfort that we all feel even in our professional lives. But it also meant that I was exposed to opportunities that I'm now re-embracing as an adult.
Do you feel like there's something about navigating that? I totally agree that it's like wonderful to have more exposure to things and kind of get the opportunity to experience things you might otherwise not have. But I know that sometimes people also talk about how it's important for their self-care to kind of go back to their community where they don't feel like the only one. And I'm wondering if that factors into your self-care ever.
A part of moving back to Austin is also reconnecting with family. I had, family. I have a sister and nephews in New York. And so it wasn't like I was without family, but, my mom is in Austin. My family, when we come together, we usually do it in Austin. And so not just the kind of activity or being out in the sun motivated me to move back to Austin, but it was also reconnecting with family. I've spent more time with my mother in the last 3 months than I have probably in the last 15 years. Wow. And we are playing Scrabble. We are going to the gym. We are watching this show called American Ninja that I had no idea even existed. And I'm now addicted to it because my mother introduced it to me. And it's like the most exciting thing that I'm doing in my life. And I find myself thinking, wow, I'm watching American Ninja as everybody is watching whatever the president is saying or doing at this point. And I don't feel like I'm missing out on a thing. And it's beautiful. So certainly reconnecting with family was a big motivator to move home, and knowing that in my life professionally right now, I had that freedom to do that. And I might not have that in a year or 2 years. And so to take advantage of that was also really important.
Yeah, totally. So you used to lead Rock the Vote, and then just even in your engagement with me, I feel like you're a person who's really invested in young people and their political participation. And I'm wondering how you think about the connection between civic engagement and self-care.
Certainly for me, civic engagement for a big part of my life, and still now has been a part of my self-care, where I don't think I could function in the most productive or quality way where I would be happy if I wasn't working on issues that affected marginalized communities, vulnerable communities, trying to, really connect and re-enfranchise people with their political power. And so civic engagement, I think, is an important ingredient for self-care, especially as it relates to building community. And hopefully that building of community happens offline. I think a lot of civic engagement has moved to the online space. And so you lose that aspect of how it actually is a big, important part of self-care. And I've been very intentional, not just with this move, but in the past few months of getting off of social media. For example, that's why I'm in Miami with VoteRunLead, and we're training people to run for office. And I know that there's a lot of really hard issues that we're confronted with right now. It has been extremely, extremely hard, difficult these past couple of weeks with the separation of families and the Muslim ban. And now with Justice Kennedy's retirement, it's just one thing after the other. But the work that I do with VoteRunLead to train women to run for office has fueled my soul in a way that I am talking with folks who don't have that type of work, and they don't know where to find hope in their life. They don't know where to, find the light in a lot of this darkness. And without this work that I'm doing with VoteRunLead, I don't think I would be surviving this moment very well. So it is really, really important for my quality of life to be engaging people in finding their political voice, in building their political power, and, standing up for the issues they care about. And it's selfish because it fuels my soul.
Yeah. But as you're doing that with folks, what advice do you have for them about how to make sure that they're doing it in a healthy way to prevent burnout, so that they're not like running themselves into the ground and, burning out before they're like 30? How do you kind of navigate that, especially as someone who did burn out at one point?
Yeah, I mean, I left Rock the Vote after 5.5, 6 years, and I remember there had been this moment when Cher had canceled a concert because she was suffering from so-called exhaustion. And it was the first time I'd heard this term, exhaustion. And I remember thinking to myself, like, oh my gosh, these celebrities, they just make up everything, right? And when I ended my time at Rock the Vote, I didn't know initially that I was suffering from exhaustion. I couldn't function. I literally stopped and just stood in place in my professional life, my personal life, for about 6 months, because I had been on the road 300 days out of the year. My entire life was only focused on work. And so to your question of the advice I would give would be to do the opposite of what I did when I was in my 30s, where my entire life was work. And if it wasn't related to the work I was doing, it had no place in my life. I didn't create any space for it. And that almost killed me. It almost killed me with a very serious anemic problem that I had. That was because I let my fibroids go on to a place of where my doctor called me after some tests and said, yeah, you need to get to the emergency room right now. I don't even know how you're standing. I haven't seen anyone with these levels be able to actually function. And I went to the hospital and had to get 5 pints of blood transfused because all I cared about was work. All I cared about was the impact. All I cared about was the results. And I had to come to grips through this very serious health situation with that I can't make impact if I'm not alive. I can't have results on these issues that mean so much to these communities and mean so much to me if I can barely stand because I don't have enough red blood cells. So, for me, it was having to face that very dire situation. And my advice would be don't let it get that far. I'm very fortunate that in that moment, I went to the hospital. I'm very fortunate that my mentor actually looked at me and said, you don't look well. I need you to go check in with a doctor and see what's going on with you. In that moment, my boss said, go take care of yourself. And I hadn't been telling myself to go take care of myself.
Yeah. So speaking of your work with Fox, what do you do to keep your cool as a Democratic strategist on Fox? As as a Democrat on Fox, how do you do that? And how do you especially do that being a Black woman and the kind of tropes that Black women are often kind of antagonized into performing?
I do hear from folks all the time, how do you keep your calm? It's not actually that hard because I look at it as I'm having a conversation. And when someone says something that's ridiculous in my normal life, I don't necessarily pop off at them. A lot of times I'll just laugh in their face. A lot of times I smile. A lot of times you respond with humor. It's not normal from a human interaction standpoint to always be at level 10. Mm-hmm. And I think we've gotten to this place where in media that we think to be successful, you have to be at 10 when you can actually dial it back and be engaged in an issue conversation that you're really passionate about, that has really strong meaning to communities, in many cases can even be a life or death. And you can have a real authentic conversation. And I think that's what audiences are looking for. They're looking for authentic conversations. They're not looking for performances. And so I have no interest in performing. That's not who I am.
Yeah. Do you think...
Except for karaoke.
Do you think kind of that authenticity and then also not always being at a 10 means that then when you are at a 10, it's like just much more notable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the Fox News audience knows when I'm at a 10. And I get feedback that they can see that if a conversation is going to get me to that level, I think they take notice that, oh, wait a second, this must be a little different dynamic here. I need to pay closer attention to it. And, Aditi, it is also very intentional as a Black woman and knowing that when not just conservatives, but even this is within the progressive community and amongst Democrats, that there is this idea of the angry Black woman. So I'm also very intentional and able to stop myself from playing into that type of perspective from a strategy standpoint. I don't think it helps any cause or any issue that I care a lot about and want to move forward to fall into that trap. Now, even in times where I may be angry about something, I keep in mind, how is the audience going to respond to that anger? And that's what helps me stay calm.
Yeah, I think you're right from a strategy standpoint that you always have to be mindful of how you're going to be perceived and received. But at the same time, there is something just deeply frustrating about knowing that you have to do work that other people don't have to do because there's not that same baggage and stereotypes that exist for them.
Yeah, it is frustrating. And I certainly I'm not perfect at it. I've lost my cool on many occasions, and certainly around things that are very connected to my family of former undocumented immigrants, my parents having immigrated from Liberia.
So we talked about kind of your perspective as someone who's often on the news. What advice do you have for people, given that there's just so much news, a lot of it's really bad? And what advice do you give to people who are kind of feeling hopeless about the current state of news? We spoke about it a little bit when we were talking about civic engagement, but I'm just wondering your perspective on that.
So certainly first and foremost is to get off of social media. I have done that, certainly more so of late, where I'll take weeks off of Facebook. I will have very limited engagement on Twitter. And I'm saying that as someone who is in the media, but I had to check myself and make a decision of, is this helping or is it hurting? And so by removing myself from those conversations, it has been extremely helpful. But I know that I'm also really, really far away from hopelessness right now. And it's due to the fact that I am really laser focused at the one thing that I can do to make a difference, the one thing that I can do to move us forward. And that's training women to run for office. So the work that I'm doing to train women to run for office on a weekly basis proves it provides this instant gratification for me that, you know what? It's all going to be all right. And it's because of these women and their stories and their commitment and their passion and the opportunity that they are bringing to our politics. And I wouldn't get that if I was reading my Facebook feed or, stuck on Twitter all day. I think you have to get offline and really find the one thing that you can do to make a difference. And that for me is this.
So on that amazing note, I want to thank all of our listeners for listening to another episode of Self-Care Sundays. I'm excited to announce that Self-Care Sundays is now streaming on Spotify and RadioPublic. Before we wrap up here, I want to offer a special shout out to our patrons on Patreon. Their generosity makes our show possible and are a huge reason why you're hearing this episode today. We are especially grateful for the support of our super contributors, Vicky V, Renu J, Brady K, Bill S, and Embershot. If you'd like to support the show and hear your name at the end of our episodes, please check out patreon.com/Self-Care Sundays podcast. Again, that's patreon.com/Self-Care Sundays podcast. Also give us a follow on Twitter at Self-Care Sundays and on Facebook at Self-Care Sundays. Jehmu, it was so great to have you on today. Where can our listeners find you on social media, although you often are taking breaks from it?
Yes, they can certainly find my social media accounts. I can't promise that they're going to get content, constant non-stream, but at Jehmu on Twitter, Jehmu. I'm the only Jehmu on Facebook, I think. It's great. At first, I thought a name like Jehmu would make it hard, but as long as you put in Jehmu, you'll be able to find me on all of the different platforms, Instagram, Facebook, social, LinkedIn.
Awesome. I like to thank the person who made our show art, Leah Horowitz, and the amazing artists who make our show music for Real City. On behalf of our producer, Jess Thalwar, our communications interns, Kennedy Freeman and Sophie Gomez, our audio engineer, Kato Zane, and myself, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.